All right. Okay, that took a little bit. Okay, so any initial feedback on the class discussion on breathing Earth? I'll read your responses, but any comments immediately? Yes.
Do you know how they collect that data?
No, there's got to be a link on there that would say that. Let's take a look. Has anybody taken a look? The world of meters was well documented. You could go to the source and all that kind of stuff. So, wow, this is odd. Enable Flash Player. I don't know what's just happened. What's just happened? Did it just change? That can't be the case. What happened?
It was .com.
Ah, thank you. Nope. Oh.
You have to enable the Flash Player.
That's why. Okay, you're right. Allow. I remember doing this yesterday. Thank you. All right, there we go. So, about breathing Earth. Comes from reputable sources. What do you think about that? Data measures things on a massive scale, can't be 100% accurate. Okay, let's see if there are reputable sources that we've got references to. Where does the data come from? There we go. CIA World Fact Book. Does everybody know about this? And the UN Statistics Division.
They don't update as time passes like that.
Yeah, it looks like the 2010. So, and then we've got 2006 figures. So these are old figures, right? Nuts.
So is it like so it's not in real time then?
2015. No, it's not real time. It should be, right? All right, I'll give extra credit to anybody that comes up with the real time figures, right? If you can find a link on that, that'd be great. Okay, any questions on the writing assignment here? Okay, from last week that's going to be due tomorrow? I think not, right? Overshoot theory, everybody was clear on that? Right? Okay. All right, let's get into biodiversity, development, and sustainability. We've talked a fair amount about development, and we talked a little bit about measuring sustainability. I want to get into talking about biodiversity and also Janice Alcorn's thoughts here. She just posted something on Twitter. Just a second. See if we can. See if I can get to it. Janice. Is that right? That doesn't look like her. Just a minute. Let's try over. There she is. Terrifying look at the consequences of climate change. I think that was what she did. Oh, wow. Well, there's some new news. How about that? Do you know about that? Have you read about this? Okay, this is from the Washington Post 20 hours ago. An iceberg twice the size of New York City is about to break off of, I think that's Antarctica, right? The Brunt Ice Shelf. Any idea about what has been prescribed to happen when we have these kinds of events? What happens when we have the ice that breaks off?
Sea levels rise.
Good, thank you. Okay. So that's one big one she did. And the terrifying look at the consequences. Let's take a look at this. The Economist. When is this out? This was last week. Okay. Hello. Okay. Anybody get to see this one? No? So this is something that you might relate to the overshoot theory, right? in the overshoot theory, we've got lots of discussion about what to expect from war to disease and all those kinds of things. So warning that we've got some, is that all we got? Oh, we have to log in to read more. Okay, I see. Okay, well, unfortunately, we can't get to that piece of news. Any other news that we have that's current and pressing about out there in the world that you know in relation to anthropology? Yes.
There was something I saw first on social media that I looked up, but in Iceland, whaling, I guess the government allotted another 2,000 whales to be hunted in a sense for the next 5 years.
2,000.
The initial source I said it was something against worldwide laws, but I can't remember now if that's true or not.
Right.
So it was just interesting.
Interesting. Okay. Did you see it on CNN? Is that where you saw it?
That's the next
Yeah.
source I looked at. Yeah.
Iceland to let more than 2,000 whales be killed within the next 5 years. Sorry for that visual. Only 2 whaling companies remain. What does that tell you? Is this indigenous whaling? Difficult to tell. The word companies, kind of for profit, right? So that's a little bit different from indigenous rights that are not for profit. Nevertheless, this is a country that's whaling for profit, right? Okay. Research on which fisheries we're basing the quotas. So we've got some quotas that we're discussing and we're arguing over the science, right? Iceland needs to listen to the worldwide calls to stop whaling. Okay. That's just going to even put more pressure on the indigenous people if we want that to be able to be something that they have access to. Okay. All right. Any other news? Yes.
The Japanese, I guess I'll pop up on my Facebook, the Inu, just became, they recognized people, I guess, or,
Yes.
there's, a lot of, differences with them from the past.
Right. So we've been going through this process in Japan about writing a law to recognize them as indigenous. And it's been passed and it's been in the works for a long time. I remember maybe even 12 years ago having groups come to Kauai and talk about the Ainu and how they weren't recognized and they ought to be recognized. And it was this big campaign that they went on, right? So that's fine. That's fascinating. Okay, Japan prepares law to finally recognize. Yay! So cool. So one of the processes in recognizing indigenous people around the world is to write a law. Right? So that's what we did in Nicaragua, was to write a law that said, hey, who are these people? Okay. And interestingly enough, we had more than just the Mayagna. We had other indigenous groups. And then we had groups that were mixed indigenous with mestizo. What is mestizo? Does anybody know that term? What's that term, mestizo? What does it literally translate from Spanish? Mixed. Okay, so mestizo would be who one might refer to as mixed with the, the European blood, as well as the local blood, native blood. Okay, so that's often how we refer to that group. We also had another group in Nicaragua called the Miskitu. Did we talk about the Miskitu? No. Okay. The Miskitu, I feel like we talked a little bit maybe about their history, but I'm not sure. Okay. So the Miskitu came to us from Africa, specifically Nigeria. Okay. And they were transported in the 1500s, right? So they were transported by the British in the 1500s in conjunction with the slave trade that was going all around the Americas at that time. Right. And when they arrived in Nicaragua, the British asked them, and the British came on the Atlantic side. The Spaniards came and colonized the Pacific coast. Okay. Why? Because it was a lot of mountains and difficult to colonize on the Atlantic. So maybe 100 years later, the British came and they colonized the Atlantic coast. Okay. And there were no other colony there. Okay. And at that time, they settled, and they settled with their population of African people from Nigeria. And in the process, they said, you know, we want to colonize the land. We want to dominate the land. We're going to have the people that we brought from Africa do that. Kind of interesting, right? And so they gave them muskets in the process. They gave them guns. They gave them arms, right? They gave them some way to defend themselves and an ability to inflict military presence, right? And that musket gave us the term Miskitu. Okay, kind of interesting. Have you heard of the Miskitu Coast? Anybody heard of that? No. Okay, well, now you have. So that's where their name comes from. So when we were going to look at the legal status for indigenous people in Nicaragua, we had people that claimed thousands and thousands of years, but we also had this group that was recently mixed in the 1500s with the local indigenous people and people being transported from Nigeria. And there was no way that we could deal with indigenous land rights without also dealing with that case. Strangely enough, we say the same thing about Native Americans and African Americans. Do you know that? Those that have been transported from that continent, albeit many hundred years ago, we are refusing to deal with that issue at the same time that we refuse to deal with the issue of indigenous land rights. Now, there's something new that did come up in the news about that. Let's see. I think it's 200 Canada, Africa land. Let's see if we can get this one. News. Okay, I'm going to have to look that one up another time. So we had a group recently last week that was just given rights to land because they were brought to Canada for those same kinds of purposes. And Canada now is taking a stab at dealing with indigenous land rights and the land rights of others that were brought in that colonial process. Pretty fascinating when you look at it. Okay, so we've got a number of things that are happening there in relation to that. Now, in writing that law, right, we had to incorporate the rights of the Miskitu in that process, just like what you're seeing around the world, okay? And it was a conflictive process because there were crossing claims then, and they were titled indigenous or African descendants. That's how they literally wrote it into the law, okay? But they were treated as if they had indigenous land rights. Okay, as if they were guaranteed those rights to land, even though in the 1500s they came from somewhere else. They're kind of similar in thinking about our colonial past and giving our colonial people or cultures the legal right to land as if they were indigenous. Okay, it's kind of confusing when you look at the whole process. Okay, all right, so lots going on in the news with that kind of stuff right now. And the Ainu, yay, they're just charging away at the whole thing. And I'm so proud of them because they've been on it for so long. And Japan is really a very powerful country, a very wealthy country. They should be able to just get a good one in there with assisting indigenous rights, right? So that's great to see. Okay. Any other news we're seeing? Any other news? No. Okay. All right. Well, let's go forward. Talk about biodiversity. We'll get into Alcorn's reading, but I want to give you a little bit of statistics and some things that are important for us to know about our own country and biodiversity. So national parks, over 100 years old, right? We're very concerned about our parks. One of the concerns we have about our parks is that they have a lot of repairs needed. Oh my goodness, look at that. Yikes, that's a lot of money to spend into repairs. And a lot of issues about our public commons land. Think, these are our commons lands, okay? Some people say everybody's lands is no man's lands, but also we have this thinking, well, if there's everybody's lands, maybe we can do something to cooperate to take care of it, okay? So we have some interesting figures about parks in the developing world, okay? And I want to talk a little bit about this case. 1% of the parks in the developing world receive protection. Okay, so you know what the developing world is, right? It's not developed, right? So that's everything from the second world and the third world, okay? So we're saying that those areas of land in the second world and the third world, 1% of those places that are identified as parks, only 1% are being protected, okay? And we wonder what they mean by protection, okay? Because I could tell you that the Basawas, right? Let's see if we can pull that up. Oh, we're slow today. Okay, we've got the Basawas in here. You see the part that's green? Right over here, we have the Bokai River, Ba. Okay, if you go out a little bit, right over here, we have the Sislaya Park, Sa. Okay, and then over here, we have something called the Waspuk River. Okay, so that's how we call the name Basawas. All right, so we have this area that is 8,000 square kilometers. That's pretty big. That's about 17% of the size of Nicaragua. That's kind of large, right? We say in the Ministry of Natural Resources in Nicaragua that this is called a protected park. This is protected under UNESCO. It's called an International Biosphere Reserve. We've done all kinds of, you would say, inventory on what exists in the nature reserve. We surprised a bunch of people. They didn't think harpy eagles existed there. And we found claws, and we found that they were present and flying around. Same thing with Baird's tapir, right? So this is a monumental park as it relates to conservation. This park also was afforded the ability to have some funding from the Green Climate Fund. Do you remember that one? Where did that come from? Does anybody remember where the Green Climate Fund came from? I think we had a $13 billion annual funding just for 2019. Okay. Oh, wow, that's huge, right? Nicaragua got 14 million of that a couple years back. And the idea was we were going to outfit all of the areas with forest guards. We were going to continue tracking all of the wildlife, which we were doing by GPS units. You know, you can tag animals by GPS units, watch them from the satellite. This is mind-blowing, really cool, right? We're going to continue doing that. We're going to make sure every territory had a truck, right? All the forest guards were paid, okay? And that we had one for each territory. There's 6, 7 territories there, right? Going to make sure that it was very, very protected. We were going to make sure there was no narco trafficking going on in the core region. We were going to be able to have all kinds of monitoring of any illegal presence with immediate punishment, right? You remember, you got to have strong rules and punishment that's immediate, right? And what ended up happening to this 14 million was the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of the Environment got brand new trucks. They got brand new air conditioning units. They rebuilt their central offices in Managua. And what ended up happening in the field was we got one forest guard. One. Not outfitted with any kind of outfit or official wording about what he was up to. No arms, no guns, no nothing like that. And guess what? He's volunteering. So none of this made it to the field. Okay? And that means when we look at this as being protected, it's protected on a piece of paper, right? Like we drew the lines and we mapped it. We said, it's protected and here's all the rules. And we developed what was called a management plan. We went territory by territory, community by community, and said, what do you do about the river? And they said, we don't cut down trees within like 100 yards of the river. Does this make sense? Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. We'll talk about why later, right? We said, okay, we'll write that down. So we wrote down all of their management plans, passed it through the Ministry of Natural Resources, right? And in the end, we have nobody that is monitoring the park. Nobody that is ensuring that if people are violating the rules, we keep everybody honest, right? We have some leaders that'll haul people in from time to time with a bunch of guns, but it's really dangerous. Did that last week, right? Seriously, did it last week. So when we look at that kind of management arrangement, we call them paper parks. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because they're just parks on paper. And yeah, we've got a lot of effort that we did to protect that area, but in reality, people can come in with guns or any kind of thing, pay people off, and you've got a problem, right? So when we look at the 1% that's received protection, I'm sorry to say, this is what protection means. So we've got a really skewed idea about what natural environment protection means around the world. We look at our parks and we go, oh, look at the parks. You got to have something like that, right? EPA laws, Environmental Protection Agency, along with your Endangered Species Act. We protect stuff, right? But it's not the same around the world. So even in our part of the world, we've got a lot of issues. Okay, so one of our biggest issues that our parks might be too small. Okay, variable populations. Have you ever heard of that term before? What does it mean? If a population drops below the variable population, what do we expect to happen in the population? Yeah, it'll be small, and because it's interbreeding, as we go into subsequent generations, what do we expect? Problems, right? Mutations, okay, because of interbreeding. So the genetics of the species group, the community, isn't healthy enough to be able to reproduce well, okay? And ultimately, it ends up dying out. So that's what we talk about when we're talking about sustaining critical species. Okay, so some parks are just too small to sustain those numbers of species that are critical to their population numbers in terms of genetics. Okay, all right. Tourism. You like to go to the parks?
Yeah.
How many people like to go to parks? I like to go to parks, right? Yay! I want to go to Joshua Park. I've yet to be there. I can't believe I've lived here so long and I haven't been there yet. How many people have been there? Would you recommend it?
Yeah.
Yeah? Why?
You can see the sky.
You see the sky. Really? It's like real open and sky and real pretty out there. Yeah, okay. All right, well, I'll try it, okay? What do you remember in terms of visiting park areas? We've got infrastructure where we can use the bathroom, maybe buy something, right? Limited amount of time you can be there. Hey, does it ever cost? We went through this weird discussion about costs on Kauai. We said, the state said, oh, we're going to charge for state parks all over. And we said, wonder where our money's going to go. And we hadn't charged at all for our parks on Kauai. And they said, oh, we're going to take it and put it into the general. And we said, no. And we also figured, gosh, if they're going to charge, that means they're going to put somebody there at an entrance. And it also means what else is going to happen every time you go in and out. Actually going out mostly. What else are they going to do? People that collect things are very concerned about this. Check you, right? So if you've been collecting things, gathering things in parks due to cultural ways of doing things, oftentimes this is a way that we track what's being harvested, what's coming in, what's going out, and even preventing things, right? So it's another added control that we have on gathering rights, okay? Increased numbers of visitors, yeah, they do put pressure on parks, okay? And that's part of that issue that we have about infrastructure, right? Helicopters might be an additional noise, especially in Hawaii. We've got a lot of helicopters in Hawaii just constantly flying all over the place, disturbing the park areas. Okay. All right. So we have national park efforts, maintenance, repairs, training people, surveying wildlife. Do you know of any surveying wildlife going on in parks? Wolves. Interesting. Where's that?
Not sure.
Yellowstone, probably. Yeah, they did a whole big, huge thing on Yellowstone. Have you ever seen the thing on Yellowstone? Wolves. How wolves determine a river. Do you know this one? It's so cool. Hold on. So if you haven't seen this, this is how wolves change rivers. This is a good example about ecology. They're going to wonder about us in the classroom. Hey, everybody.
One of the most exciting scientific findings of the past half century has been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom. And the classic example is what happened in the Yellowstone National Park in the United States when wolves were reintroduced in 1995. Now, we all know that wolves kill various species of animals, but perhaps we're slightly less aware that they give life to many others.
Anybody seen this? Raise your hand if
Before
you've
the
seen
wolves
this.
turned up,
No?
they'd been absent
Wow.
for 70 years. But the numbers of deer, because there was nothing to hunt them, had built up and built up in the Yellowstone Park, and despite efforts by humans to control them, they'd managed to reduce much of the vegetation there to almost nothing. They just grazed it away. But as soon as the wolves arrived, even though they were few in number, they started to have the most remarkable effects. First, of course, they killed some of the deer, but that wasn't the major thing. Much more significantly, they radically changed the behavior of the deer. The deer started avoiding certain parts of the park, the places where they could be trapped most easily, particularly the valleys and the gorges. And immediately those places started to regenerate. In some areas, the height of the trees quintupled in just 6 years. Bare valley sides quickly became forests of aspen and willow and cottonwood. And as soon as that happened, the birds started moving in. The number of songbirds and migratory birds started to increase greatly. The number of beavers started to increase because beavers like to eat the trees. And beavers, like wolves, are ecosystem engineers. They create niches for other species. And the dams they built in the rivers provided habitats for otters and muskrats and ducks and fish and reptiles and amphibians. The wolves killed coyotes, and as a result of that, the number of rabbits and mice began to rise, which meant more hawks, more weasels, more foxes, more badgers. Ravens and bald eagles came down to feed on the carrion that the wolves had left. Bears fed in it too, and their population began to rise as well, partly also because there were more berries growing on the regenerating shrubs. And the bears reinforced the impact of the wolves by killing some of the calves of the deer. But here's where it gets really interesting. The wolves changed the behavior of the rivers. They began to meander less. There was less erosion. The channels narrowed. More pools formed. More riffle sections, all of which were great for wildlife habitats. The rivers changed in response to the wolves. And the reason was that the regenerating forests stabilized the banks so that they collapsed less often, so that the rivers became more fixed in their course. Similarly, by driving the deer out of some places and the vegetation recovering on the valley sides, there was less soil erosion because the vegetation stabilized that as well. So the wolves, small in number, transformed not just the ecosystem of the Yellowstone National Park, this huge area of land, but also its physical geography.
Cool, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. Great. Find that surprising, anybody?
Yeah.
Yeah? Really cool. Like even the water banks and everything. Yes.
Didn't something similar happen like that in like Big Bear, I want to say?
Big Bear, I don't know.
Like they introduced a new like
Wow.
editor and it like changed the whole
Interesting.
system.
Huh, I haven't heard, but that I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, okay, so we're working with reintroducing populations and seeing what happens with those kinds of things and fussing with various numbers. And the wolf experiment that we did in Yellowstone was huge, right? And you would call that maybe restorative ecosystem restoration, okay? All right, so national parks. Now, in terms of internationally, so national parks nationally, right? And we have some, remember last time we talked about the Nature Conservancy that puts aside land privately for conservation and things like that. So we have privatized land as well. In terms of internationally, we have nature reserves, okay? So the Boswas Reserve started out as a nature reserve, and then it became what's called a biosphere reserve. What does the term biosphere mean? Anybody know? Yes.
Is it all of the living things encompassed within a specific area?
Yeah, the biome, right? Oops. The biome. Okay, so yeah, it's really encompassing a whole regional area of an ecosystem, right? All right. So we have nature reserves, right? And we have some of these areas that are protected, like the biosphere reserves. Okay. We've spoken about corridors before. Do you remember that conversation? Do you remember that we were looking at the Boswas area with the broadleaf rainforest as a corridor linking up the Amazon and then up into the Potomac? Okay, so we talked about a little bit about corridors and that kind of thing. All right. Surprising maybe this number that no more than 5% of the globe is protected, considered protected from harmful human activities. Are you surprised by that number?
Yeah.
You surprised that we reserve 95% of the earth for ourselves? No. Yeah, okay. Again, the data is interesting, how we get this data and what it makes us think of and where it comes from, right? Okay. So we've got some things that have been suggested for our environment. You've heard in the news recently what about our natural environment? What are we saying about our environment right now? Yeah.
If we don't act fast, then we're screwed.
Yeah, screwed, like terrible. Like, do we have a time frame?
2030.
20, 30 years. I even heard one that said 10. It was like, no, no, scary, right? Some of these numbers, okay? And they don't always publish all the full science along with the years, so it's difficult to get a full grasp on what's happening here, okay? But some conservationist biologists said, we need to protect at least 20% of the earth. Right now, we're only protecting 5%, but if we really, really want to restore the ecosystems and protect the earth, we need to go to 20%. And a lot of people thought that was really impossible, okay? So we have a lot of private groups that are involved in conservation, yeah? Nature Conservancy we've talked about. World Wildlife Foundation, how many people know of that one? Okay, what do they do?
Protect the wildlife.
Protect the wildlife, yeah? Okay, so funding things like protection of parks, right? Paying park managers, paying people to monitor numbers of species, right? You might find it surprising that both the World Wildlife Foundation and the Nature Conservancy have been supporting indigenous conservation. How many people are surprised by that? No. All right. Well, I'm doing my job then. Yay. Okay. Because it might be surprising to some, especially when we have arguments at the IPCC. Remember the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. if we're having conversations at the IPCC about how they should or should not be harvesting their food, right? So it's interesting that we've had some efforts to work together here. Conservation International is another one doing similar activities like that all around the world. How many people have heard of Rainforest Alliance? One, no more than one? Okay, they're huge, also throughout Latin America. And likely will be getting bigger in other places, but they've done a lot of work with protection of indigenous rights. They did a lot of funding for the case of the Quechua in Ecuador, where we had a lawsuit against Chevron. We had a lawsuit against Chevron of $11 billion. We had 40,000 indigenous people that were plaintiffs. They won. Do we know this story? They won. And Chevron said, nah, we're not really based in Ecuador, so you can't really say that we owe anything. And so the plaintiffs, with a hired lawyer, big guns, and funding from Rainforest Alliance, tracked him down to the US and said, you know, gosh darn it, you owe. And they got a $9 billion award from the United States. Right? You think, well, all right, then. Right? Pull in the funding, right? No. Not only did they say, we're not based there, but you're going to have to come find us in Canada. But then they filed a lawsuit against the lawyer that was defending and got him disbarred. Slammed him with all kinds of bad press and false fake news and all kinds of stuff like that. So, interestingly, Rainforest Alliance has been involved in that whole process. Sounds strange, right? But litigation for these kinds of issues is also what we're talking about here. And the defending of rights of people that are protecting those areas is a lot of that. How many people have heard of these NGOs or big entities? Ford Foundation, right? Okay, we've heard of that. Mellon Foundation, are you aware of the Mellon Foundation? How many people know of the Mellon Foundation? Not many, okay. Oh, yes, yay, all right. MacArthur Foundation, anybody know about them? Yay, okay, good. So we've got more knowledge about Ford, a little bit about Mellon and MacArthur. They're also very, very involved in land management by indigenous people and conservation management and protection of forests. More through the protection of indigenous people, right? Protecting the land by way of protecting their rights, okay? Then we have multiple land trust groups where they will buy a piece of property and put it into trust to save it, okay? We had a group on Kauai that did this. We have, let's see if I can show you a picture. Hanalei. I just type that in, right? Images. Okay, so if you look at this image right here, yeah, I lived a block from the beach for about 15 years. Best place ever, right? I used to go and run the bay every morning and be there at sunset and sunrise. Right over here, there was a piece of property that was being sold. And people were going to buy it and develop the heck out of it, right? And not only that, but if you can see, there's a river that runs right through here. So it was going to contaminate the whole entire river. So we had a group that purchased the land and put it aside. That's what this group did. Put it aside, right, for conservation and protected it from all of that development. So that kind of thing happens too. Have you heard of that in California? Anybody heard of people doing that in California? Privatizing land? Little bit.
There was a bridge between the mountains and a park, and they couldn't figure out how to make that land private, so they decided to call it a graveyard.
Oh.
Started burying people there.
Wow.
So that animals would get across the mission.
Yeah, the corridor for that. That's interesting. Yeah, a lot has been done in our country for corridors, for highways, systems like that. Yeah. Okay, so we have a lot of confusing topics. I'm going to send this around before I forget. We have a lot of confusing topics in the area of biodiversity and even in environmental science. Let's talk about the word nature. Everybody clear on what that means? I go to the grocery store, see something that says natural, and I don't even believe it. I'm like, that's another way of masking chemicals. The word nature in and of itself, kind of confusing to me. What does nature mean to you? What do you think of when you hear the word nature? Natural meaning what? Not human or human?
Not man-made.
Not man-made. So we're not natural.
Oh, well, let's say if a monkey builds a hammer, that's also not natural.
Right. Okay. So the monkey that builds a hammer, not natural either.
Like it's a dead natural.
Interesting. So we do have issues in understanding the concept of nature. Even further, take it into the idea of wild lands or wilderness. Do we have wilderness today?
Yeah.
Okay. We have legally defined wilderness in our country. Okay. This is what it means. So the Bossawas is 8,000 square kilometers. This is about 4,000 square kilometers. So that's about half the size of the Bossawas. That area is what we called wilderness areas. We have very, very few wilderness areas in the United States that are legal according to that definition. Okay. In fact, we have a lot of protected areas that go down to even only 4 acres. Yes?
I feel like wilderness should be defined as like a place where people don't go.
Interesting.
Because you step into it.
Yes. A wilderness, a place where you don't go, right? Instead of a protected area like this. Okay. I agree with you. The term suggests that it would be a place that's not got human stuff or human culture or ads or billboards or things like that, or even helicopters flying around, right? So good addition there, right? Okay. Statistics on wilderness for us. 4.6% of U.S. land is protected as wilderness. 3/4 of that is in Alaska. Right? Only 1.8% is in the lower 48, mostly in the West. 98% of the United States is reserved for people. 2% is reserved for wilderness or parks, as it were. Right? These are bad statistics. How are you guys feeling about this? Yes?
So do like national parks like fall into that category or no?
Yes, although if you're looking at wilderness and the legal definition, this is what you'll see. You see? So, yes. And then when we're talking more specifically about wilderness, only 4 of those that we have in our country, 413, only 4 of them really are true wilderness, right? So not very genuine. Okay. All right. Wildlands include only 81 of 233 distinct ecosystems in the U.S. So we're not protecting all of the ecosystems that we have in our area. Everybody feel good about ourselves now? Feel good about the world? Feel good about what we're up to? Was it Europe or was it France that talked about banning plastics? Did you see that in the news? Who was it? Just last week. Plastics, like, let's see.
We have plastic bags here.
Yeah, we did plastic bags, but this is all levels of plastics. Let's see. France. Yeah, France, I think. Okay, so one of the strictest plastic bans. Single use. Let's see what they have to say here. Oh, Vanuatu. And it's about to get tougher. I don't know why they said France. Maybe because it might be a French colony. Okay, so there's some new news about plastics and attacking plastics. So we've got some ideas about what we can do. How many people know E.O. Wilson? Okay, well-known biologist, right? And very interested in population of insects. he's had some things to say about what we should worry about in terms of insects. We've talked about insects, right, in the last couple of weeks. You remember that? What did we say about insects? Huge drop, right? Huge drop in insects, okay? So he says, what can we do? First thing we need is immediate action in hotspots. Those are our biodiversity hotspots. That's the Bossawas, that's the Amazon, right? The coral reefs. We have something called a cloud ecosystem in the Southwest here. That's another area that's highly endangered, okay? So we need immediate action, okay? Probably laws and monitoring, I'm thinking, right? Maintain old growth forests. What do we know about old growth forests? What is an old growth forest?
Been around a long time.
Long time, okay. How long? Usually like 150 years plus, right? Okay, we can talk about old growth forests a little bit further on in our lecture. Okay, mapping of global biodiversity. So we know where it is. And we know how to put a special effort on protection, right? Marine hotspots had a lot of focus on reef systems and that being a tremendous threat, right? Land or lakes and river systems, some of our most threatened ecosystem in the world. How much fresh water do we have?
Not a lot.
Like 2%, something like really. Global fresh water percentage. Is it 2%? 2.5%. National Geographic says. Well, nearly 70% of the world is covered by water. 2.5% is fresh. We're talking about drinkable. Although we do have some sources for drinking water in newly worked salt water, right? We have some new technology in that. But this is talking about ecosystems, not talking about consumption. Okay? Develop a global conservation strategy. How about the IPCC? Coming together every 6 months to talk about climate, right? Is that what we're talking about? Probably. That's pretty as global as you can get when it comes to coordinating efforts for climate issues, right? Thank you. So make sure we develop that. Did it. Got it. We meet every 6 months. We've got models that are incorporating about 200 different kinds of scientific data. So it's difficult for us to piece it together and make it clear. And yet, that's our biggest focus, okay? Make conservation profitable. Hey, how about that? Impact investing. Remember, we've been talking about impact investing, where it can actually kick back some good investment fees for the investors and yet do something good on the ground, right? Solar energy we talked about. This is something else that we're talking about in relation to parks, okay? Ecological restoration worldwide, okay? All right, let's talk for a moment about making parks profitable. How many people know about the carbon market? What is the carbon market? We got into a little bit of ideas on carbon offsets. Yes? Carbon taxes. Okay, so let's see. We have a couple of carbon markets, one of which is in Chicago. We have another carbon market, I believe, here in California. Real strict rules here in California, probably because of the way things worked out in Chicago. Okay, so who might need to buy credits for emitting carbon? Okay, so somebody that's gonna emit stuff like oil refinery companies, right? Okay, so we have credits. All right, and that means certain kinds of companies are allowed to emit a certain amount, okay? And what happens when we go beyond that amount? Buy more. No, it's not slapped with a fine, it's buy more, okay? Yay! All right, so In order to get these credits, where do they come from? Yes, the government approves them. But the government approves the ability to emit carbon based on something. What do you think it is? They're selling credits to emit more beyond what you already do. Where do they get those credits? Interesting. I had a strange conversation with some of my friends down in Nicaragua. They said, guess what they're doing now? We get to sell air. I was like, what? This is crazy. You guys are nuts. This is crazy. I don't believe you. No, like, seriously, for real, we can sell air. And I'm like, what are you going to box it up in balloons and ship them all off? Or something? No. So what are you doing? They said, we get scientists that come out to the middle of the Boswas. They measure oxygen levels. They measure the area around. They measure how much protection we're doing. And then we get to sell that air based on how many carbon credits it can provide. Okay? We were all excited about this. We were all excited to get involved. We thought, oh, this is going to help support the indigenous conservation. Ended up going through the state, so only the state benefited, right? But in essence, what we did was we had an area in the middle of Central America that we knew was protected. And we said, hey, let's certify that, right? And in certifying it, we get a certain number of credits, and we can go to Chicago, and we can sell those credits on the Chicago market. Somebody else will buy it, and we get money for it. Anybody got any thoughts about that? California had some thoughts about it. California's been developing ways to deal with it because they think it's a problem. What do you think the problem is? Anybody got any immediate ideas? Yes.
We're getting rid of air. Like
Kind
that,
of.
like
Yes, absolutely.
permission to pollute what isn't polluted.
You got it, right? We weren't certified before. There weren't these credits that were on the market already. We put new stuff on. And because we put new stuff on, yay, because we got to sell air. Oh no, that means all of the places that are emitting carbon get to raise the amount of carbon that they emit because now they get to buy it, right? Never mind that it's a cost, they end up making it. That's what they want to be able to do, is you emit it. So what we did was we just put new carbon credits on the market that weren't there before, which means, yeah, we got money from it, and we're going to keep doing what we're doing, but now the pollution has just increased, right? Pollution levels. Difficult to think about these things because we think, oh, wow, yay, let's support the local people, right? So California's developed a few other issues about how to certify and how to incorporate that. Great topic for a research essay if somebody wants to look into it. But oftentimes, making conservation profitable involves ideas like this. And if we're not thinking it all the way through, we can run into problems where we're creating worse issues. Yeah? Okay. So glad you now know about carbon markets, right? Yes.
Sorry, I don't mean to go back on this, but like the wilderness state,
Yes.
does that include like aquatic biomes, like coral reef or whatever?
Ooh, gosh, I'm not sure.
Because I mean, like, not a lot of people are gonna be like exploring.
Yeah, I think no. I think it's a land thing rather than and that land would incorporate wetlands, I would think, and lakes probably, but probably not ocean aquatics. Yeah, good point. Very good point. Yeah, there's a lot of ocean aquatics that would be considered wildlands, I would think, like never gone there kind of thing. Interesting. Very good. Good thinking. Okay. And lastly, you said ecological restoration worldwide. So restoration being, hey, let's try and restore something. Now, take into consideration that we believe that it's possible we could never restore things. Think about the idea that once we've changed an ecosystem, we can never, ever, ever get it back to the way it was. We looked into this with terraformers, right? Because on the wildlife refuge, where we had 10 farming families, they said, we want you to maintain a specific way of the ecosystem, and we're going to remove all of the invasive species. So they said, so all the egret, the cattle egret, the toads, we're going to remove the toads, the fish, we're going to remove the fish, the prawns, shrimp, all those kinds of things. We got to get it out. We got to restore it. And the taro farmer said, wow, this is nuts. They said, this is nuts because now look at it. All the birds, they don't have any food now. And it was interesting because we went through a process of trying to remove those invasives to bring back the restoration of the original ecosystem. But what ended up happening was that the birds had evolved, right? And then even trying to restore it, we could never bring it back to the original position where it was, not completely, right? Bacteria, microbes, all those kinds of things just can't, right? So some people question ecological restoration. Having seen the film about the wolves, however, seems like there's some good work that's being done, right? Okay, so what will it take? Some extra ideas, a penny per coffee cup, adding on an extra charge for those things that you normally do every day. What do you think? You guys ready to pay more for your coffee? Heads up. What? Coffee? No.
They've been doing that with reusable containers.
Reusable containers. Yeah, we're doing that.
So like it costs more per pound, but then you have containers, so it tastes
Okay, so that's part, right? The whole straw thing we did fairly well, right? Any other ideas about paying more for things?
So there was a company that was creating coffee cups that used coffee grounds.
Used coffee grounds.
Yeah,
Wow,
so
that's
they would take
interesting.
Coffee shops used grounds from the day, and they would.
That's interesting. Fascinating. What happened to them?
I'm assuming they're still working. I don't know. It's a small company as far as the last time I checked.
Great.
I can't remember the company.
Oh, that's interesting. They were making paper plates out of plants in Hawaii. That was really interesting. Instead of styrofoam. Okay, so will you charge more or pay more for things? Like, would you write down that carbon offset if you were going to fly to New York, for example, and pay more, right? A lot of us would say, I don't know. Yes.
Isn't living sales tax the most fair tax because no one's like forcing you to consume?
No one's forcing you to consume. It's like the soda tax, though. Don't you remember the soda tax incidents? No. We went through this whole thing in New York where the New Yorkers were like, oh, we're going to put a tax on soda because soda's bad. Nobody should be drinking soda, right? And so the tax was going to go to the health industry to cover any offsets problems with the health industry from those drinking too much soda. And we all said, no, that's not right. Why not? Not we all said. Some people did. Huh?
They wanted their soda.
Far be it from the government to manage what we get to decide what to eat, and right? You see, so having that charge for something is sometimes seen as a manipulation of what we should be consuming and not consuming. So it's like violation of freedom, some people think. But yes, it's a good suggestion. Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there a law in California that we have to pay like extra 10 cents for like plastic bag or something?
Yeah.
Probably. So that's exactly doing that. You're right. Yes.
I think like the difference between like this like a plastic bag versus the soda is like they're controlling your own health, but something like a cup or plastic bag. That's not affecting only you.
Oh, but wait, because we have to support that health system with our taxes sometimes, little bit, but that's kind of round the about. Yes.
The other
Good comment.
Socioeconomic.
Yeah.
Soda, there's like soda and juice.
Uh-huh.
If there's a tax on soda, people would go to juice, but juice is always more expensive.
Oh, good
So
discussion there, right? With shifting.
you can get the juice.
Yes.
Down.
Good point. Shifting consumption. Okay. What about political pressure? So that was charging more. What about political pressure? Think we should put some political pressure on things? How'd the Green Deal work out? How's the criticism of the Green Deal? I mean, like, I'm hearing some, yeah, right. And then I'm hearing like, wow, like they're going to make it so we can't even fly. You know, like, have you heard some of these comments, right?
Dan Feinstein had some little kids come and say, you should be Green Deal.
Oh, right. There was a thing where she argued with kids. That was weird, right? Boy, that was bad political event for whoever organized or disorganized that one. Political pressure. So we'll see how that ends up. Not all politicians believe, so some political pressure can change. Strange it was when I began teaching environmental anthropology in the middle of the new administration that came in. And there were some things that happened that were surprising. So one of the things that happened was a lot of our websites went down or were changed. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah, you remember that. Okay, good. I'm glad that you remember that because it became political. All of a sudden, our science went political. And our science is kind of political, but it was pretty obvious there. Cooperation. It's going to take cooperation, right? And maybe we can get there, right? But it's going to involve going back and forth with teaching each other or teaching each country to each other how to interact and cooperate. All right. So I wanted to do a special focus on forests. And then on Thursday, we'll finish up with Janice Alcorn, okay? So forests, one of my favorite topics. About 30% of the world is covered in forests, so we should be concerned about this. We have boreal, temperate, and tropical. Temperate rain or temperate forests, you should know, actually emit carbon. How many people didn't know that? Emitting carbon. Okay, so if we're talking about forest restoration, and using them as carbon sinks, what's a carbon sink?
We use less carbon.
Where the carbon goes in, it's taken care of. It's like the rainforest is considered carbon sink, right? So can't think of those temperate areas as carbon sinks anymore. And there's some new studies coming out from Science and Nature magazine journals that are being real specific about that, okay? Measuring it and whatnot, okay? So we've got boreal forests, cold areas making up a quarter of all forests, tropical, half, yay, temperate, a quarter, okay? Old growth, 150, right, plus, okay? We're concerned about old growth forests. We got really, really concerned about it in Washington State. We had quite the campaign. I'm sorry, I've not done that, right? I can see you guys squinting, so I've not done that. So there, now you can see this a little bit better. So one of the things that we found out about old growth trees in Washington State was that a lot of them would fall over and become what we called snags. Have you heard that term snags before? Not so much. Okay, well now you have. So they would become snags, or there would be parts in the tree that would be deadened, and they were perfect habitat for what we called the spotted owl. How many people have heard of the spotted owl? Okay, do you remember the controversy of the spotted owl? Is that why you know it, or have you just heard of it? Just heard of it. Okay, so we had a controversy about the spotted owl because we had a lot of loggers in the area that needed to continue to make money, right? And that meant we had to continue to cut areas, including areas that were old growth forests. However, we started learning new things about old growth forests. One of the things we learned about them was in relation to snow. We learned second growth forests can't have the boughs of the tree hold up the snow. They're too weak. So the snow comes, the rain or the snow falls to the ground, melts, goes into the water system. Old growth forest, strong, holds up that snow. And then throughout the year, the snow slowly drips, slowly melts, and the water slowly goes into the water system. The old growth forests are preserving a lot of our water flow where the younger trees cannot. Does that make sense? So one big thing we found out about it, water. One of the biggest production that comes out of trees is water. I would have thought timber. No, water, right? Next thing we found was we had these species that were dependent on really specifically old growth forests. If they didn't have the snags, these little buggers, these little spotted owls wouldn't go near them, wouldn't go make a home in the snags, in the trees. They had to be old trees. And that meant we were focused on this stupid bird. And it was endangered. And that meant this stupid bird was the only thing keeping people from making money. So our campaign, save a logger, eat an owl, right? See if we got it. Oops. Nope. They took it off. All right. Okay. Save a logger, eat an owl. We had t-shirts printed up like this with a little owl in the front and a big old, target on it. Save the humans, right? We had a little bit of ecosystem science come in on second growth forests, and they said, hey, look at, we've been having this strange phenomena where a lot of our rural character is going into the urban, and some of these places that we were cutting down all over the world, especially in Latin America, now they're going back into second growth forests. Should we be able to count that as forests or not? So we had a big argument about secondary or second growth ecological succession and trees. Other aspects of forests, we have tree plantations. How many people have seen these? Okay, what kind of trees have you seen?
I know that when I went to Costa Rica, we did we replanted some trees.
Yep.
And I think those were I want to say palm or coconut trees that take really long time to grow, but it would be future in the because they were they would cut down trees.
Interesting.
And then, we started to be all these just planting a bunch of trees.
Right. We have some laws all around where if you do this, you can cut down these and things like that. So, and then we have projects where we're trying to reforest. We also have tree plantations where we're trying to grow trees really fast, okay, and use it for paper production and other things like that. So we're not having to cut down some of the old growth forests. Okay. Surprise, maybe you might be to know that in genetic engineering now we can engineer trees to take in more carbon. Do you remember me saying that before? No. Cool, huh? Screw climate change. We'll just engineer it.
Does it mess up anything else?
Ha. Okay, so one thing that we did is, remember the BP spill that we had out in, okay. So BP had a big, huge spill, and we took microorganisms and we engineered them to eat oil. Wow. And then threw them out in the ocean. And they ate all the oil. That was part of our remediation of the spill. Okay. So yay! Any questions? What happened to them? Come on, man. Okay, so it ate the oil and then it floated down to the bottom of the ocean. Now we got a bunch of microorganisms with oil in their bellies down at the bottom of the ocean. I don't know what that's going to do. Do you? I guess we'll find out.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so yeah, we're talking about genetically altering trees to take in more carbon. Not really sure what that kind of thing is going to mean in the long run, but a lot of people find it fascinating and think about the idea of being able to use science to resolve these issues. Okay. Do you remember we talked about the textile industry? There was a gentleman by the name of Ludd, last name Ludd. Anybody heard of him? Yes, you've heard of him? No? Yes? Yay! Very few people have. Okay. And he was protesting a lot of the textile industry. And people joined with him and they said, oh, this is going to be a disaster, right? Climate scientists would maybe agree, right? He said, this is going to be a disaster. And they protest. And people said, oh, you guys are awful. And they called them Luddites, right? He said, these people are going to call them Luddites. And we recognize them as anti-science and anti-development, okay? So you'll hear this term as it relates to climate science or other kinds of science. Don't be a Luddite, right? Just get on board. We can engineer these trees. We can resolve climate change, right? I mean, we're talking about bringing back the woolly mammoth, right? How are we bringing back the woolly mammoth?
Science.
With what species? The elephant, right? Okay, we talked about, right?
We haven't, but
Humans, did we talk about that?
no.
Wait, what?
Trying to bioengineer humans.
I'll just leave this for you guys with science, okay? Then we were talking about Luddites, right?
They're trying to breed organs.
So we have some volunteers for people to help, and we can do it. What it means is like mind-blowing, right? Do these people, are these people? Do they have animal rights? Do they have human rights? It's kind of difficult to think about, right? So science can go in all kinds of directions. We think maybe it can help with forestry. We think maybe it can help in protecting the natural environment, right? Okay, I think I'm going to stop there for now. Let you guys go for the day, and we'll come back. And when we get back, we'll go over a little bit about the economic, and then the last maybe 20 minutes of the class, we'll go over the midterm. Okay? All right. Have a good day, guys. Thank you.